All right guys, welcome back to the garage. Now, you remember that video I did where we replaced the massive factory Dodge Dakota booster for that smaller Dodge Daytona booster? Well, guess what? I think we're going to delete it. Now, let me explain why. The issue we're having is room for an intake manifold. Now, the options for an intake manifold for a rear-wheel drive 2.4 setup are very slim. There's just not a lot of options of factory manifolds that allow a rear-wheel drive setup when you're using the Dodge 2.4. Now, my original plan was to use this 420A intake manifold, which you can see now does fit in there with the smaller booster, but we have some issues. First of all, to even make this manifold bolt to the 2.4 head, we have to re-drill some holes. This hole and this hole are the only ones that match on the head. This bolt hole will have to be re-drilled on these two. And then for the top, the only one you'll have is this center one right there. Since this manifold does not have the ears on the top, we won't have any bolts along the top except for this one. So I'm kind of sketched out about using this, especially in a turbo application. There would be no support for the manifold up here except for this one bolt. Then come issues with the water neck. Now this is the Stratus water neck that came on this engine, which in the brake booster video, when we tried to fit these two together, throttle body hits the top of the thermostat housing here, which I've looked online on eBay and stuff to try to find a different 2.4 water housing, but I have not been able to find one that would make any difference trying to run this manifold. Plus there's one more issue. Now, like I mentioned, the only two holes that match up to the head on this manifold are these two, right there and right there. Which you can see this one is shared with the water housing. So you'd have to get kind of creative to allow that bolt to be used on both of these. You can see how that just does not mesh, not to mention that. Now I tried to fit the factory Stratus manifold in here that came on this engine, but the steering shaft runs right into it. Physically it would work, it comes down and then the throttle body would be right here, but you can see steering shaft is right in the way since it dips so low in the engine bay. It's just not going to work. Now I did consider the Jeep 2.4 intake manifold, and basically it comes up top of the valve cover up here. So it's nice and short when it comes off the head, but it does curve all the way up here and then throttle body's over here, which would work considering that manifold is on a rear-wheel drive 2.4 setup, but it's plastic, it's kind of ugly. It's going to cover the valve cover, throttle body's over here, so you would almost have to run a same side intercooler since the turbo would be on this side, and you'd probably have the cold side piping on that side also. And I just don't like the idea of it coming on top of the valve cover, even though we do have room from where the hood will sit, but it's kind of a last resort manifold. So I bought this. Now this is from a Caravan 2.4, and you can see it has the throttle body facing forward like we want. It has integrated water housing with the simple water neck that comes off here. This is where your thermostat would go. So that's nice. I should be able to use this front wheel drive performance fuel rail from an SRT4. Just needs a little tweaking here on the inlet. And even the factory SRT4 throttle body bolts right up and matches perfectly. So things are looking really good for this manifold, except it simply does not fit even with the smaller booster. Since we have such long runners on this manifold, it comes up and hits the booster. So I think we're just gonna delete it. So one of the things we're going to have to do is make an adapter plate to adapt the master cylinder to the firewall. You don't want to put that master cylinder directly on the firewall. You want some kind of plate there because the firewall is not strong enough to handle the pressure that you're going to be putting on the master cylinder. So we're going to make an adapter plate. Basically, this will have the bolt pattern of both the booster and the master, and we'll bolt this to the firewall using the bolt pattern of the booster, and then the master cylinder will bolt to this. Now I've been doing a ton of research on guys doing manual brake conversions in these trucks, and all of them say the factory master does just fine. So we're going to use that factory master cylinder, but one other thing, if you watched the brake booster swap video, you'll know we relocated the pin. Now it was originally right there, and we actually raised it up here, and that's because the factory Dakota booster actually comes in at an angle, the rod does, whereas the Daytona booster does not have that angle. So we had to do that. Now, what's that have to do with the manual brakes? Now, when you convert to manual brakes, you're obviously going to have more pressure on the pedal to get the same stopping force because you don't have that brake booster assist. Relocating the pin higher on the pedal gives you that extra leverage that will lower the amount of effort you have to push on the pedal. So the plus side of this whole thing is that's already done. It's just a matter of making that plate and a custom push rod to go from the pedal to the master. So I'm going to rip this booster out of here real quick and so we can test fit this manifold. All right, let's check this out. So it should bolt right in here. All right, that actually doesn't look too bad. Now, one of my big things is I want it to look decent in here, so having a decent looking manifold is a must. Now, if you can imagine, the turbo should sit right about there. So that actually might look nice and symmetrical on both sides, turbo inlet, throttle body. One clearance issue we have is this boss right here is hitting the valve cover. Now, I think that may be for EGR and it's just not drilled or tapped for it. So I'm wondering how much material we can take off of there. So it's not sitting flat against the head yet, just because of that. But other than that, we have no clearance issues along the bottom. So this may work. And then right there, master cylinder, plenty of room. And you can see that clearance issue, that's actually for a threaded hole. So I think I can cut this whole ear off right there, and that should cure our fitment problems. All right, after some cutting and grinding, we got it fitting. See, there's a little bit of gap there, but it's not touching anymore, and it's flat against the head. Now, keep in mind, there will be a gasket in there, so we might see a little bit more spacing, but that'll work. I think we're gonna roll with it. I kind of like it. It's kind of weird that's gonna say dual overhead cam turbo, 2.4 dual overhead cam, but whatever. My only question is, do I leave it raw aluminum? Because it is pretty clean, or do I do wrinkle black like I did the 420A manifold and the valve cover? But I'm happy with the manifold. I think we're gonna rock it. So let's move on to converting to manual brakes. All right, the first piece of the puzzle is this plate. This is 6" by 6" by 1/4" plate, and got it off Amazon, believe it or not. It's gonna sit right there. So, first thing I'm gonna do is find center and drill a hole, and then we'll have to drill a bigger hole for the master, and then we can set the master in there, and that'll give us the guide for the 2 holes to bolt the master to it. And then we can use this spacer, which is from inside the truck between the pedal assembly and the firewall. And we'll use this to get our holes to mount it to the firewall using the factory booster holes. And then it'll just be a matter of running bolts through the plate to bolt to the firewall, 2 bolts the other way to mount the master to the plate, and then we'll have to make a custom push rod. So we're going to find center here. Take a punch. There we go. Now we'll drill our pilot hole. All right, now we're going to attempt to drill a hole for the master to fit inside. All I have is this hole saw, and I'm pretty sure it's not for metal, but we'll see if it even goes through there. If not, I'll just have to pick up some hole saw bits. All right, it did it. All right, that made a pretty decent hole. Our master fits right in there. And I use a 1.5" hole saw. All right, so now I'm going to place this in here, center it up, just make sure it's level. Perfect right there. All right, I got my holes punched. Now my plan is, so here's my hardware. I want to drill and tap that so I can actually thread these in, and I'll do the same for these four. I'll drill those out, tap them, and then thread the bolts through. And then of course, once the bolts are threaded through, we can just slide this on, nut it, and it should be good. All right, let's see if this fits. Perfect. Just need to get some shorter bolts, but that'll work. All right, next up, I'm going to throw this on there for our template, and I'm going to center that up using the center hole that we've already drilled. And then we can work our holes. Just like that. And we'll take a punch and punch all these right in the center. All right. Now to drill some more holes. Okay, I got my bolts threaded in there, so let's go see if this fits on the truck. All right, here we go. Perfect. And then here's how the masters will sit right on there. But we're going to have to clearance some of the firewall for those bolt heads on the back side of this plate. I'm going to come in here and mark where this is. Looks like we have to take it just a little bit out of here for this bolt head to sit back there. So we'll just probably notch either side of the firewall for these bolt heads to fit. And it should be good. All right, got my studs in there. I used Allen head bolts just to have a smaller profile on the back. Let's see if we cleared enough room. Oh yeah, that fits good. So now, see the master cylinder will just slide on like that. We'll put two nuts on there. So now we can slide the spacer back in here between the pedal assembly and the firewall. Get that pedal assembly tightened back up. Do an install of this. That way we can make a custom push rod once we have the master bolted to this plate. All right, master is bolted up. Plate is bolted through the firewall to the pedal assembly with the factory spacer in there. So now we need to make a push rod. All right, so you can see there's the master cylinder, there's our relocated pin, and it's pretty much dead on. So now we need to make a push rod that matches those two up. And then also, it might be a good idea to make a pedal stop. That way, if for some reason this pops out of here and the pedal can come farther forward, we don't want the push rod to fall out of the master, since we won't have any way of actually securing it in the master cylinder. So I don't know if I want to rely on this as my pedal stop. I might weld a bracket and have an actual pedal stop just for safety. All right, here's plan A for a push rod. I got this threaded rod here and this eyelet that threads onto this rod. And the idea here is we can get close in our measurement, install this into the pedal assembly, and then we'll put a jam nut on here and we can extend this so it's the perfect length, lock that jam nut on it. That way there's no guesswork as far as cutting this rod to length. But the first issue we have to fix is this hole in the eyelet is too small. We need to make that 1/2 inch. So I think that's the first thing we're going to do. Drill this out to 1/2 inch and see how much material we have around here to make sure this eyelet is going to work. All right, let's see if this slides over the pin and the pedal. Oh, it's close. There we go. I think that'll work. Just need to clean up the inside of it a little bit. And let's see. Pedal bottomed out. We still have room between that and the master. So I think we can use this. So now we need to figure out an overall length from inside the master to the center of this pin to give us an idea of how much threaded rod that we need. So I got the measurement on my push rod, and all I did was take just a long Allen wrench and I stuck it inside the master and then pulled the pedal up, held it with my finger, and there's my mark, which turned out to be 5 1/4 inches. So I have about 1 inch of threads in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to thread this in 1/2 inch, maybe a little bit more. And then we'll take our overall length and measure out to 5 1/4. So we'll measure 1 inch. We'll measure 5/8 on the threaded part. That way we have a little bit more threads in here than not. We'll thread this in. Okay, right there on my mark. We'll measure 5 1/4 from the center of the eyelet. And it looks about right there. And we can cut our threads right there. And then, like I said, this doesn't have to be perfect because we have adjustability now, having this threaded. So I'm going to cut right there and we can test fit it. Actually, there's a couple of more things I want to do to this before we throw it in there. I need to make this smooth so it doesn't have these threads on there and bind on the master cylinder. And I also want to round this side up just so it has a nice ball to push on the master cylinder. So let me throw this in my lathe and we'll clean these threads up. All right, so we'll slide that into the master cylinder from our pedal. Well, look at that. If that's not perfect, I don't know what is. There we go, manual brakes. Just need to make sure the clip still fits on here. I may need to shave some of this down on the side of the eyelet, but other than that, I think all it needs is a jam nut to lock it in place. And then we still need to make a pedal stop. Okay, factory pushrod clip fits on there. And then for a pedal stop, I went through my stash and I found this. Now, it's got this little rubber grommet in it. So I'm thinking I'm just gonna nut and bolt it right there. And that rubber sits right on the pedal. So if it touches it, it'll be a nice soft cushion. So I just mark a hole, drill a hole, nut and bolt it there. Maybe throw a tack weld on it just so it doesn't swivel. But that's just a little extra safety so that this pedal doesn't come any farther forward and that push rod fall out. Now the push rod does sit inside the master, maybe like 1/2 inch maybe. So this pedal would have to come forward quite a lot for the end of the push rod to fall out of the master. But you know, it's just one of those things. Last thing you want is to be driving and lose your brakes. So we'll throw that in there and call this done. All right, that worked out perfect. Sits right on the bumper. No way the pedal is ever going to come too far forward. So when we do final install, we'll throw red Loctite on that nut just to keep it from coming loose. But I do plan on stripping this down and repainting it just so it looks nice. Not that you'll ever see it, but at least I'll know it's nice and neat. All right, manual brake conversion is done. I think the biggest thing to take away from all this is relocating that pin on the pedal. If you want to think of your pedal as a lever, moving the pin up increases the length of the lever, therefore reducing the amount of pressure it's going to take to push the master in. So if you want to know how I did this, go back and watch the first brake booster video and it'll show you how I relocated it from there up to there. But now I'm super curious to see how the brakes feel once we're all done, but we're far away from that. So I think the next video, I'm gonna pull the swap out, pull all the suspension off, we'll final weld the plate for the steering rack relocation and start cleaning the frame and hopefully get at least from the front to hopefully the bed all cleaned up and painted. And then we can focus on cleaning and painting the firewall. And I think I want to undercoat the bottom of the cab and we can put our energy suspension body mounts in. Then after all that, it's engine rebuild time. So let me know what you guys think about this manifold. I think we're going to use it unless somebody out there wants to send me a fabricated rear-wheel drive 2.4 manifold. I mean, this one's not that ugly, is it? I mean, it looks okay. Of course, thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully this helps out some first-gen Dakota guys. If you want to go to manual brakes, hit the YouTube stuff, and I'll see you guys on the next one.